Necrobane. Written by J.T. Williams. C. 2021 J.T. Williams. Part 1. Decimation. I am eternal, though that is not how I began. I was a man once of flesh and bone, a simple farmer on the southern coast of my Vasuria, the domain of men. That was before the coming of the necromancers and the priestess Mortua. I was always a holy man, as were all those in the realm of men. I only wished to serve my one god, Vasruda, to live peacefully as I was told would lead me to the state of my greatest power and understanding. But now my eyes have truly been opened. I understand that which was hidden from me, the betrayal that all of the race of men were subjected to. I command legions. Now I have one more trial before I can ascend to the next level of service, to Mortua, the path to more power. For a necromancer of Mortua, power is everything. The necromancer stood at the dilapidated gates of a broken fortress. His spineless minions, the undead, and much more hardy but dumber skeletons, had ravaged the city for 3 days and nights. Still, something resisted him. He didn't know who or what was still within the city. He didn't know where they were. He would talk to a trusted subordinate who would swear that a courtyard by a church was clear. Then, leaving it unguarded or unwatched for any amount of time meant that unexplainedly he was looking at the burning bodies of hundreds of his summonings. In all of his conquered cities and domains, this had never been a problem for him. You will lock down the city. You will not let any leave. We have already lost 3,000 of our greatest warriors assaulting this place. I have resurrected over 30,000 skeletons in an attempt to purify this place of life, and yet, he said, pointing at his many undead captains before him, I cannot seal the city for our goddess. Our goddess does not want to hear your excuses. She does not wish to hear my excuses. I have given you until the end of this night for you to kill whatever this is that brings dishonor to Mortua. The captain, who was the oldest in service to the necromancer, bowed slightly. This man, as he was before, was actually the sheriff of the town, just up the road from where the necromancer lived, before his transformation into an apprentice necromancer. I must ask for your patience, master. I have seen the attacks this warrior launches upon us. It is no mere man with a sword or woman with a spear, nor is it some lone wizard using their holy magic to destroy our warriors. It is something else. The necromancer stared at his captain, a loyal subject adorned in the bones of countless victims. As was customary for captains beneath a necromancer such as he wore the jawbones of countless kings, lords, and cocky princes, the ones who had acted as a vanguard to larger armies to try to slow the necromancer's assault. Though the other captains standing had similar adornments, none was considered as refined as this one. His veteran captain actually had the armor of the anointed golden that fought in the great battle to begin the war, a battle that darkened the torch of the one god in the city of Vasruhal, the broken seat of power for men. The necromancer went to this captain, looking into his fiery purple eyes. You mean to tell me that it is a single soul, a single entity has evaded capture, slew a bone dragon, and somehow with the entire city under our control has remained at large? The captain bowed his head slightly and drew a white dagger from his chest, flipping the hilt over to the necromancer. It is my duty to give my life to you, for you to reabsorb my power for my failures. I do not deserve the embrace of Mortua upon my form. The necromancer nodded slowly, taking the dagger from his captain. He glanced over at the other captains who were staring straight ahead. Lesser captains, I do think such justice must be done, for our goddess Mortua does not deserve such weak captains in her service. I cannot ascend to my next place in service of our goddess if I am constantly dealing with the shortcomings of you. The necromancer lunged at the captain just beside the one he had been speaking to, plunging the fiery dagger directly into the man's chest and sapping what necromancer energy had given him life in the first place. This lesser captain fell to his knees in a groveling mass as his entire body became ash. "Take your dagger back, Captain. I do thank you for your will to sacrifice yourself, but I have need of you still." The captain took the dagger and returned it to his sheath. He brought his hand up in salute to the necromancer. The necromancer continued, "We will close in around the city and crush whatever warrior has survived and has eluded our forces. I will go myself and try to draw this thing out, and I will kill it if necessary. You and your captains need only to make sure he or she does not escape." I cannot believe I am dealing with such insolence. Captains are hard to come by. So many of the race of men succumb to madness from the effects of necromancy. A few of the ordained, the greatest of our race, are truly strong, but there are always limits. Even at my level as a necromancer, I struggle with some things, not a fledgling as I was once, barely able to resurrect the recently dead. I am still not at the place that I should be. In my time, I have seen the burning of the old cities, the slaughtering of two principal armies of men. My master was a necromancer from the land of Fickmark, an elven kingdom to the far, far northwest, a place I did not know existed before I gained the knowledge and the wisdom of the goddess. It is strange, then, that such a powerful entity such as me would be able to not simply crush whatever it is that is troubling my undead. I will see to it that they do not live to see another moon fall. The massive city and its tall walls were nothing but a crumbling ruin now. As the necromancer entered what was the gateway into the city, he looked up at the cylindrical black towers torn apart by his bone legions, swarmed by the undead, even as what would be his future warriors under his reign fell to their death. Progressing inward, he saw the staffs of many mages of light. He laughed at this. They had attempted a foolhardy defense as his forces arrived. His army always came with an encroaching dark cloud that would extend over the battle plains, creating fear and madness in the victim's mind even before there was a battle. Truly, what bravery it must have taken for any to stand against the blackness of his unending horde. As the winds of war looked down upon the city, a great golden orb extended out a shield of light that would kill any of his undead it touched. But he was not a fledgling, as I said before, and with a simple spell of the goddess, this master necromancer shattered their shield. These pitiful humans with their faith in their god. They were dead in their first life, but now they are alive and feel true power. As my faithful servants, they shall know true living in a way that they can only do once their heart stopped beating. Through a sudden surging sound that shook the ground and caused several rather catatonic undead guards to kick in the sudden motion, flinging themselves towards a collapsed building and over the top of it. The necromancer turned, sniffing the air. He reached out, his clawed fingers fumbling through the shadows, so he could see beyond the buildings themselves, seen through the eyes of his many creations. It was then that he saw the glimpse of nothing but a sliver of light. As a bright light, it cut through his minions. He was trying to view whatever his enemy was. It was nothing but a flash in the glowing white light. It fights almost as if it is a remnant, a warrior of the old god of men. But since the fall of the great city, none of that order remained to my knowledge. My master and the other necromancers that are far beyond myself and my ability to reach went about the sunken lands killing all that had that power within. Any that had confessed to their lowliness, had given themselves to the one god, were marked in a way that these other necromancers could see them even from very far away. There was none that could hide. But truly, a remnant, a lone soldier long forgotten, serving a dead god, somehow still remains in my city. The necromancer smiled. It would be so wonderful to kill them. Though mastery of necromancy has given me many abilities, the capture of the city and destruction of all life within was going to give me access to nothing more in my mind now than a piece of jewelry that would allow me to summon even more under my care. But now, thinking of a remnant, oh, even my master would be impressed by that. A remnant that had somehow averted all of the necromancers above? Glory to the goddess Mortua, glory to those who stand against the sacred darkness. Yes, I have respect for any that would face me with a burning blade, knowing their death is coming. For soon I will extinguish their light, and I will be all the more powerful. The fighting had stopped. While there were many undead who remained, countless others had been destroyed. Whoever or whatever had been killing was gone. The necromancer walked among the bodies of his charred summons. In a few moments, several undead came directly to their master. "We could not get here fast enough," the one said. Another, missing his arm. "It was fast, small. I do not believe it a grown life form." The necromancer reached out, touching where the undead minion's right arm had been. This was not a new injury, but one most likely received in the past 2 to 3 days. The dread healers just had not gotten to him yet. He moved his hand over the decrepit and rotting flesh of his servant, sending purple energies into it. As he did this, the bodies and remains of his fellow companions glowed a slight red before what matter remained of them flew towards this one undead, and his arm was restored. "Continue being ever watchful and diligent, my servants. Take up shield and blade. Seek out those that would seek to harm you." The necromancer continued to walk through the smoldering city, with the sweet smell of rotting flesh and charred remains filling his nostrils. Small, small. How does something that is small wield the blade of the one god? That makes no logical sense to my understanding. There are so few children even in the villages we do have, that I have no idea how a child could survive, but still, how would a child have any effect against my armies, against any? Truly, the undead I was speaking to did not know what they saw, perhaps. I cannot imagine that any would have a single understanding of something moving quickly like I was seeing, though it is quite strange that whatever it was that was killing, I could not see it through my vision. I saw only its weapon. This is strange. I will take this city as my own claim of destruction. This grand city of man with its tall walls and many fortified powers had fallen quickly. Still, it was a place that he was given charge of destroying, due to his perfect record of never failing the goddess. It was a record he did not want tarnished. As he made his way to one of 2 islands in the center of the town, where at one time at least, water flowed from the far northern mountains down the slope to the dales in the valleys. To make this place of supposed beauty, he noticed a single fire burning just ahead. Stranger, there were none of his undead on this island. Though he could see the marks in the dirt and the ash that they had been here, it was a place of relative emptiness for the energies of Mortua's will. As the necromancer stepped across a bridge, he drew out his staff, which until this point is simply just on his back. He flipped it, holding it out almost like a shield, as he glanced around the ruins of the city. The light was still ahead of him, though this was not any holy fire or something like that. Had it been like that, he would have sensed it and approached with an active ward. This was something else, and exactly what it was surprised him. "Master Tarek," a voice said from ahead. The necromancer slammed his staff directly into the ground, sending a shock wave of rippling purple fire. "Why did you do that?" the voice said again. "It is a child. How is this possible? How did it know my name from before?" The necromancer did not move another step. Instead, he left the path directly before him and began to move around the side. Here, many twisted metals and stones gave him some form of cover, as he looked about for who was speaking. He took a deep breath, drawing in air, and then, blowing on the wood of his staff, attempting to whisper a command for all his summoned to come to him. But the incantation in his mind suddenly fled. He could not remember the words. "You have done well up to this point, master, but you are not a true servant of the one that you serve." The necromancer stomped the ground, and a searing flame leapt from his eyes, cutting into the rocks and stones all around. Normally, this was only used in a last-moment duel, where his enemy had advantage and he could not cast a normal spell. A single bit of the necromancer's vision on the soul of the living, while casting the spell, would instantly sap the life of any life form. He noticed fire, the light he had seen before, flee upwards. He lifted his staff again, suddenly able to recite the incantation, and called forth his minions. In a few moments he was surrounded by a swarm of undead skeletons. His elder captain from before approached him. "Master, for a moment we were all stricken, unable to move. I tried to reach out to you, but it was like there was nothing. What happened?" Part 2. Hunters. "I don't know what happened. How did that happen?" He looked at the captain and smiled. "I saw that which avoids us. It is a child. It must have some form of sacred weapon that allows it to overwhelm our lesser forms and move quicker. I had to cut myself away and focus all of my energies into blocking the weapon it had obtained." He noticed that the captain had a look of fear upon his bony face. "But I have destroyed the weapon that it had," the necromancer continued. "It is nothing but a child running scared through a broken city. I want you to send out all that we have to seek out this child. Call back our legions. Bring all back unto me. I shall summon 2 bone golems for my own protection. I think there may be more of these so-called children with weapons. We will not take unnecessary risk, but we will not lose our grip on the city to a damn child." "How is any of this even possible?" The necromancer watched as his dozens and dozens of servants spread out going about city. He began twisting together the necessary spells to call forth 2 bone golems to protect himself. Twisting, burning flames appeared before him as he continued to manipulate the energies. "I do not know what tricksters would try to use against me, but I will not fall so easily." The truth was, he would not be caught off guard again. Though he had told the others, his captains that looked to him and served him unquestionably, that he essentially had the advantage over whatever this was, he was not too sure himself. "Whatever this thing is, I consider it truly my greatest challenge. I have slain so many of the great warrior race of men that I almost consider it a chore now. That said, there have been so many of my necromantic brothers that have fallen to the blades of the remnants, and before them the anointed golden of Vasru Hall and their sapphire captains, that the pure bliss of the other in the life of the last remaining one would be almost greater in the blessing of the goddess. The golems he had summoned were at least 3 times as tall as him. While as a normal man he was about average in height, as a necromancer he now stood almost at 1.5 times that. The golems were larger than that. At 3 times his height, these creations were a mixture of undead random bones in the very stone of the ground they walked upon. They did not have the intelligence to operate too far away from him, a true conjuring or familiar, as some would say. Their entire existence was to block incoming threats such as poisoned arrows or magical blast, neither of which he expected from this creature of plain face. But soon he would see what he was actually fighting. "As a child I came to this city. I seem to remember this place. This small, dusty hill and island surrounded in ruins was a place of life magic. If I remember, the city had 3 intersecting points of water forming triangles. This was one corner and one spot of land. There were 2 others at each point in the center. Yes, the center was the key." The necromancer moved with his golems directly into another court of ruined buildings. Now his undead were skulking around, a line of skeletons clicking and clacking on the stone streets, their bones rattling as they looked left and right. He looked up over the height of the city ruins, for smoke was still smoldering upwards with tall plumes. He could see his watchers, the massive shadowy bird-like creatures that stalked the crumbled walls, a perch from which to see the grander view. These were his greater eyes, his way to see threats long before they approached. That was the border of his army, and it was clear that all of his forces were near. Now, the only sound heard all around the city was his massive horde of his conjurings, attempting to find this one lone warrior that had continued to hide. I draw near. I come to the place, the focus of what I have been drawn to. This is the center ground, and it is clear the greatest of my warriors have been through here already. The necromancer looked upon what was once holy ground and saw nothing but cleared stone. Yes, it was no doubt they proved a strong defensive line, the greatest of warriors to protect this holy shrine to the one God. This wasn't like when the war began, when the massive pillars of the goddess from all corners of the land spread a poisonous toxic fume that killed the living and made an easy augmentation to the already large armies of the first necromancers. No, this ground in the city had been fought and taken by the necromancer's own forces. No great plume of poison in our overwhelming magic, just the terror of enveloping shadow, darkness, and the screaming of those it could do nothing to protect themselves. But even with all that the necromancer was looking at, the destruction he was personally responsible for, by the extension of his great power, there was a single structure made of nothing else but 4 columns and a single silver sphere. He stopped leaning on his front foot, moving back to the guard position with his left foot. As he looked to his left and to his right, he took a moment to look up and back behind. What is this? Never before has something been left where my warriors went, especially in a holy place such as this. There is some trick here at work. He gripped his staff in his right hand, moving his thumb over one of the jewels to control the level of energy that was fed from his body into the staff itself. He didn't know what trick was before him, but he knew there was something. It seemed that now he would have to take a more direct approach to dealing with whatever it was before him. He placed his staff in his left hand, gripping it tightly and pushing on one of the stones he never had to use. A massive scythe erupted from his otherwise normal black staff of charred bone and crystal fire from the altars of God. As he held his staff in hand, he motioned for the golems to move forward. He would keep his stance where he was, whispering an incantation into his staff to call his army towards him. But just like before, the incantation failed. He could hear the giggling of a little girl. A moment later, there was an explosion of light and a figure running through the center of the 2 golems. The figure spun about, slashing a blade that appeared, leaving glowing slashes in the air like dual moons in the night sky. The burning crescents decapitated both of the golems and vanished with a snap. The necromancer reared back to swing his staff just as a spectral form jumped up and over him, flying into the darkness. He turned, staring at where it went, looking for wherever it managed to go. Behind him, he heard the giggling again. He turned and stared at the now glowing orb set atop the 4 pillars. I told you, Master, you would fail in the end. What is this thing talking about? I have never spoken to this thing. The orb sitting high on the lone structure suddenly took the form of a little girl with long brown hair. It was a child, and not just some spectral child or spirit. The necromancer could see the life force around her. This indeed was a child, so without doubt, it was not a normal child. How is it that every other living soul in the city dies, and yet somehow you, a little girl, executed all of my creatures, all of my beasts, and yet you don't run from the sight of myself? Do you not see that I am many times larger than you and more powerful? You are a simple mere miscreant of the race of men. Do you wish to come with me? Learn the ways of necromancy, how to serve our goddess. The little girl had her hands behind her back, a small grin to the side of her face. Her eyes, though, her eyes begin to slowly glow like shimmering pearls. You know I do not speak to you. I speak to the ones that came before you. They tried. Oh, how they tried. They wished to kill me before I was born. They were slow. They did not expect my followers to give such a fight. What is this thing? I do not know of what you are, girl. I do not care. You must be some test of the goddess, some way to see if I'm truly ready to ascend beyond my power now. I am ready for your test. You are but a small child. I know that humans can live greater than 800 years, but still, you cannot be more than 6 or 7 years old. The little girl nodded. Perhaps, but it doesn't matter. We're in the deepest region of the Sunken Lands, a place where no one would seek me, help me, could possibly reach me without a stout heart beyond that of a mere necromancer like yourself. The necromancer tightened his fist on his scythe. Do you know that even now my armies converge on this very location? Death looks to grab you and drag you into the depths. I would use bones as a personal vessel for my food and drink. I do not know what power you think you have, but you cannot stand against me and against an entire army. I've done okay so far. Her words did nothing but anger the necromancer. He had many things said to him from those still living, many pleading, begging for forgiveness or mercy, none of which, of course, he gave. But now the small child with some special power, if nothing else, was outright mocking him. The necromancer smiled. He held his scythe confidently in his left hand, slowly spinning it. All around the city, smoke and dust rose as his massive army converged on this one location. This is the last living soul within this entire city. There would be no escape, no way for her to jump from one place to the next. Whatever safety or sanctum she had in the solitary structure that remained was fading away. I have all of this. You have nothing. You are nothing. The girl laughed. I can read your thoughts. You're funny. Do you think I, just a small little girl, could defeat all of these monsters and be scared of someone like you? I am only 8 and learning, but I know what you're not. You're not really a strong necromancer like what came before. You're not an elven necromancer. You're not a Dwemer necromancer. You're a scared farmer who gave his life to a forsaken goddess, and now is trying to convince me of how, oh, so powerful she is. Do you not know that I am the daughter of the one god? The necromancer took his scythe in both hands. He took a deep breath in while staring at this child. You're a liar. The necromancer knew of such stories, knew of the grand assault on the one city, the temple of the one god, Vasruda, the darkening of the great torches that shined his everlasting light. He knew of Mortua, the goddess who swarmed that temple on the fateful day, and slaughtered the avatar of the Vasruda, born just moments before the grandest assault against the special warrior god of the city. He had heard of the story. His master had told him of that, of the glory. Spoken was that even the grand race of the Dwemer came upon the field that day, and could not stop that which was the glory of the goddess. The power of the necromancers would never fail. Mortua even fractured the very lands, sinking them down and killing the life force beneath. It is why this region was called the Sunken Lands. This child was nothing more than a lucky little girl. Now, staring at her, he could see what she was. With very short hair and bright blue eyes, she mocked him. She wore the armor of the remnants, who before the fall were called the Anointed Ones. She was no true avatar daughter or spirit of the one god, for all the gods were dead. The race of men had fallen away to nothing but small pockets of defenseless heaps of trash. But he'd play this little girl's game. He would remove her skull from her body, pull her arms and legs apart, and allow her corpse to be devoured by flies upon this very ground. He would claim his victory over the city and the finale of his rise to ultimate power by drinking from her skull. It is something I will enjoy, smiling even now, thinking of devouring her brain. Little girl, you are quite brave for one of the race of men, but you must know you have failed. Men have failed. You will do nothing, she said. She smiled. The race of men has not failed. There are still those that draw breath and fight. I may not be able to leave this forsaken place, for I am bound here. I wait. I call out for the single few souls whom remain so that they can come to me. This place is given to me as a place of protection in the final days of the city. Many died to protect me. They know who I was and who I am to be. I may not ever leave this place. I'm duty-bound to the orb of shimmering light you saw before seeing me again. This is the deepest portion of the sunken lands, a place that I may never leave, that even as the seas of the great oceans fall over, I will be bound here. But with me will be you and your entire forsaken army. The time for talking had faded. The necromancer called forth his legions. He summoned his undead wretches, his skeletons. Now his captains were by his side, though he could not deny that to some degree he expected some ward to be protecting the child. It did not seem to exist. His army breached what was once the holy grounds and simply surrounded her. He lifted his hand just as they were about to be upon her, and they halted. The little girl twirled her hair in her finger and giggled. "You still think I'm some defenseless little girl? I may be not much of that if I leave this ground, but you do not have me surrounded. I have you where I want you." She smiled. "The truth is that you cannot escape me now." Part 3. Necrobane. The necromancer signaled his hordes. His captains were beside him already. In a flurry of necromantic fury, the undead horde swarmed the child and the lone pillar still standing upon the holy grounds. The necromancer watched as his forces converged on that one small spot of ground, and the girl vanished under the piles of undead, clambering up and towering over in a growing mound upon her. At first, he just smiled. His captain stood by, ready, but laughed at the massacre. Such an easy victory for such a hard-to-kill warrior. The necromancer did not celebrate, though. The mound of undead and skeletons growing upon the girl began to rise up higher and higher, an unnatural number now rising high into the sky like a tower. His undead could not control themselves. More and more were being fused upon one another, and wailing as this monolith of power began to draw in more and more of the undead in a wisp of shining light. "Captains, strike her! Strike where she stands!" His captains did their duty, screaming out as they drew their spears and swords, flinging themselves at the base of the tower of undead. They struck, cutting through their own warriors, trying to reach her. The necromancer watched as more of his army was drawn in, and then a sound filled the air like a wailing banshee. White fire blasted out from where the girl was buried, and in a jolting bolt of energy, the child blasted up the tower with a blazing blade of fire, turning the undead into a shower of bloody and broken parts. "Te-he-he-he-he-he," the child laughed. The captain struggled to even stand in the deluge of blackened blood and goo. She landed amongst them, cutting each down in turn. The necromancer leapt upon her, bringing down his scythe in multiple large swathes, but she either evaded or parried them, leaping over him. He focused upon his staff, lifting it up and slamming the ground, sending out a wave of green fire that would normally stop any living creature in place. The girl floated above, unaffected. Only his veteran captain remained. The necromancer spun his staff, joining his old friend as the undead armies swarmed the girl. She was cutting through them as if they were nothing. Not a single one could land a strike or otherwise stop her. "What is this foolishness, master? What evil gives strength to this child?" "I do not know," the necromancer said. He sighed. "Master orders. What would Mortua have me do?" The necromancer nodded. "What would Mortua have you do? This girl is untouchable, unholy, and a scourge like nothing else. I don't know what Mortua would have me do, for my captain to do, or even what I can do. Distract. Circle around and we'll hit at the same time. Go low with your strike, I'll go high." Get a blade into her form and throw her from this holy ground of hers. It gives her power." The captain saluted, moving through the continuous stream of undead headed for their deaths at the hand of the child. "Mortua, give me power. Let me destroy that which is before me." He slammed his chest with his staff, and his body became alight in purple flames. He held it in both hands, aiming its fiery tip at the girl and sending a volley of fireballs. She lifted her sword, putting her attention on him. The fireballs dissipated before even reaching her. She began to run atop the heads of his summoning, making directly for him. As she jumped into the air, he lifted his staff, summoning a ward which she cut through without a single pause. Her sword came in with a jab, and he swept, parrying the tip of her blade to the side with this staff. She withdrew, slashing low and then attempting to smack him. He swiped her with his claws, just scratching her skin. He used his red eyes, sending a searing light into her form, but even as she looked directly into his eyes, his energy flowing into her skull, she did not pause. He pushed forward and brought his scythe down upon her. She caught it. "This is not ground to fight me on, necromancer. No, not at all." But then in came his captain, his blade piercing through her lower back and out her abdomen. He dropped his staff, drawing out his bony sacrificial blade. He stuck her center throat, her blood rolling down his arm as he lifted the child directly up, above the supposed protection of her holy ground. "For Mortua, I do this. May this city now be claimed as my own." The girl grabbed his hands even as her blood flowed over him. "No," she said, staring at him. His blade seemed to be forced from her body. Her wounds in her throat glowed brightly as the flowing blood ceased. The wound in her lower abdomen, burning with a purple fire from the evisceration that the captain had given her, was suddenly like it wasn't even there. "No," she said again. In a flash, his captain was dead. The undead flew backwards away from her holy ground, and the necromancer was alone. He went for his staff when she summoned it to her, making an arching slash and cutting him across his chest, sending out a crackling explosion of energy as he rolled upon the battleground. He coughed, questioning how she could have taken his staff, the one thing tying him to the power of Mortua. He drew out his club, one of his first weapons he used to smash in the skull of a holy man to claim his allegiance to the god. He clutched a vial of poison, a backup for if he somehow was needing to break from an engagement. No living creature could be within this plume. The necromancer ran from the child, avoiding another arching swing from his scythe and clubbing her in the face. He struck again and again. She leapt upon the very tip of the scythe, seemingly dancing around him. He couldn't strike her. He couldn't even reclaim his staff. He tossed the poison upon the ground, and, in a plume of purple dust, she simply slammed back down into him. He was knocked to his knees as the last of his weapons had failed. The little girl remained, and the necromancer was on his knees. All of his army and all the power he thought he had was now nothing for the might of this child. "I did not want to destroy you. I feel bad that you were sent here to take the city. I mourn the loss of those that wish to protect me, but I cannot ignore their sacrifice. Truly, all of your army, all the power you thought you were given by an accursed goddess, and I feel sorry for you. For in the end you were afraid, and a path of fear is not easy. I failed as the god of this realm. It is that failure I must work through during my time here as flesh and blood. I am more than that, though. I am a feeling, an emotion, a power in the world unlike any before. My mother was just as you, flesh and blood, as you are flesh and blood. But I, too, am spirit. I, too, am a creator. Oh, do I wish that even in my feeble form I could do something to destroy the dark that you have formed around your soul. I wish I could remove the pain and suffering. But none of that is my purpose." She leaned down to the necromancer's face as blood poured from his mouth. He expected her touch to be anything but what it was, as her hand touched his shoulder, just over one of the spikes on his black armor. He felt the cooling sensation and calmness flow into his soul, a soul he did not think he still had. He felt sad. He felt lost. He barely had the strength to look up at her, but as he did not see the wide-eyed, crazed warrior that he had fought before, the entity that had slaughtered his captains and minions. He saw only bright, clear eyes staring into him. "Sleep, let your soul release. I remain for the ones who will come for me. These lands will be rent, but this ground shall be a sanctuary." The necromancer felt a weight lift off his body, and as he pressed his staff outwards, the child took hold of it. "Be at peace, son of the highest creator. Your fear makes you weak, but I will not let the race of men fail." The necromancer looked towards the avatar. He saw she now held that which was the first sign of his passage as a necromancer, his staff. Though he expected some change, some blinding light or some explosion of fire, and she embraced the staff, wrapping her hands around it and hugged it. "Why do you embrace that staff of the evil goddess, as you are? Why do you embrace something of necromancy?" "Because," she said, "a path of peace and one of silver blades and glowing light is but one path. My path will not be so simple and holy but unholy as well." You had a moment of hesitation which shows even the darkest and the lost still has a chance, still have light within. Your weapon was your life, a symbol of the power given to you for the loss, or so they thought, of your soul. The necromancer felt the sadness and longing within him. He looked up as the many undead of his army became erratic, snarling and moving away from him. They did not converge upon him, did not stand with their master. For some reason, being upon this holy ground, they did not just simply cling to him and become as dust with his destruction. They had become wild and untamed. He didn't understand it. "You are here on holy ground," the little girl said. "Truly, your army will become worse than I can imagine, and I fear what they would do to those who try to come to me. But no, I take your weapon and I will use it. You, necromancer, have proven that there can still be good in those deemed evil. I now wait for the brave souls that will make their journey here. They will be put through tribulation like none before, but once they're here, I'll bring my own tribulation for those that have destroyed my land. I only await for the souls of the living called to come for me." With those final words, the necromancer rested. Laying his head upon stone, he saw only the rising sun in the far distance, as the small child that defeated him held his staff and smiled at him as he took his final breath. See what is coming for the Avatar child and the foretold events mentioned here? Check out Our Dead Gods, available on Amazon.com.